The silence of Starbridge Argent was not truly silent. To the untrained ear, it might have seemed that way, a heavy, pressurized quiet that pressed against the eardrums like deep water. But to Callan Ward, the station was a symphony of dying machinery. He could hear the rhythmic thrum of the atmospheric recyclers in Sector 4, the slightly off-key whine of the gravity plating on the observation deck, and the distinct irregular dripping of coolant in the tertiary conduit. He was currently upside down, his magnetic boots, locked onto the ceiling of the maintenance corridor, staring into the guts of a relay box that had likely been manufactured before his grandfather was born. "Pass me the 3mm coil," Callan muttered, holding out a grease-stained hand. There was no response, only the dry skittering of claws on metal. Callan sighed and twisted his torso to look at the small, six-legged lizard perched on a conduit pipe. The creature, a stowaway from a cargo haul 3 months ago, blinked its 2 sets of eyelids at him. Its scales were a dull, iridescent blue that shimmered in the low emergency lighting. "Fine. I will get it myself. You are a terrible assistant, Scales," Callan said. He reached into his belt, retrieved the coil, and slotted it into place. The relay box hummed a soft, satisfied sound, and the lights in the corridor flickered from a sickly yellow to a steady, clean white. "See easy," Callan told the lizard. "It just needed a little empathy. Machines are like people. They get cranky when they are hungry for power." He disengaged his boots and flipped gracefully to the floor deck landing with a soft thud that barely echoed. He wiped his hands on a rag that had long ago given up on being any specific color. It was just another Tuesday at the edge of civilized space. Or maybe it was Wednesday. Time became a fluid concept when one lived on a glorified tin can, orbiting a dead planet in the middle of nowhere. Callan walked down the corridor, the lizard scuttling along the pipes overhead to keep pace. He moved with a deceptive slouch, his shoulders rounded his gait, shuffling the very picture of a man who had been beaten down by life and was content to stay down. His gray jumpsuit was patched in 7 different places, and his hair was a messy thicket of salt and pepper that looked like it had been cut with a knife in the dark. He reached the junction that led to the main control room and paused. To his left was the pristine, blast-proof door to the command center. To his right was a decorative wall panel made of synthetic ivory. Running diagonally across the panel was a jagged crack, thick as a finger, where a structural stress test had gone wrong 5 years ago. Callan stopped. He stared at the crack. He had the tools to fix it. He had the polymer filler in his pocket right now. It would take him 10 minutes, perhaps 15, if he wanted to polish it to a mirror sheen. He could make it look like the damage had never happened. He stared at the jagged line, his jaw tightening. "Not today," he whispered to the empty air. He stepped around the panel, giving it a wide berth, as if the crack were contagious. It was his line in the sand. As long as that crack remained, he was just a lazy maintenance worker who could not be bothered to finish his job. If he fixed it, he would have run out of things to fix. And if he ran out of things to fix, he would have to think. Callan pushed through the doors into the main control room. The Starbridge was an ancient model, a circular chamber dominated by the massive gate ring outside the viewport. The ring was a kilometer wide, a loop of dark, dormant crystal, floating in the void against the backdrop of a nebular cloud that looked like a bruised eye. Inside the room, banks of consoles blinked with lazy green lights. "Status report," Callan said, dropping into the swivel chair that had a permanent groove, shaped like his backside. The station's artificial intelligence, a personality-stripped construct that Callan had nicknamed Mother because it nagged him about oxygen levels, responded in a flat, monotone voice. "Systems nominal. Traffic 0. Incoming signal 0. Internal atmosphere at 98% efficiency. Suggestion: clean the filter in Sector 2. "You are obsessed with Sector 2, Callan grumbled, spinning the chair around. "Anything from the Korathi side?" "Negative. The Korathi sector remains silent. The last transmission was 6 months ago regarding a trade embargo on grain." Callan leaned back, putting his boots up on the console. "Perfect. A quiet shift. Just me, the stars, and a reptile with no work ethic. He closed his eyes, intending to nap for exactly 20 minutes. He had a talent for internal alarms. He could sleep for 10 minutes and wake up refreshed, or 4 hours and wake up ready to kill. It was a habit from the war, one of the few he had not managed to drink away or forget. The silence lasted for exactly 3 minutes. Then, the console screamed. It was not a normal alarm. It was the high-pitched, bone-rattling shriek of a Priority 1 breach. Callan was out of the chair and on his feet before his eyes were fully open, his slouch vanishing instantly. His body snapped into a line of tension, his hands flying across the holographic interface. "Report," he barked, his voice dropping an octave, losing the lazy drawl of the janitor. "Incoming matter stream detected," the AI droned, though the voice modulation sounded strained. "Origin Karathi Gate Network. Identification urgent. Class high mass biological." "High mass?" Callan frowned. "Is it a ship?" "Negative. Single biological entity. Mass estimate 400 kilograms. Energy signature is fluctuating. Cohesion is failing." Callan swore. He tapped a sequence of commands into the board, bringing up the visual from the external sensors. The gate ring outside was waking up. The dark crystal was glowing with a violent violet light. But it was not the smooth, pulsing rhythm of a standard transit. The light was jagging, spiking like a cardiac arrest. "They are pushing someone through without a handshake protocol," Callan realized, his eyes widening. "Those idiots. They are brute-forcing the connection." "Warning," the AI said. "Target signal is degrading. Pattern buffer is unable to lock. At current trajectory, the subject will rematerialize inside the event horizon, but will suffer 90% cellular dissociation." "They will be turned into soup," Callan translated. "Boost the containment field. Divert power from life support in sectors 3 through 9. "That violates safety regulation 402, the AI protested. "Do it!" Callan roared. The lights in the control room dimmed as the station groaned, diverting its lifeblood to the gate. Outside, the violet light intensified, turning blindingly white. But it was not enough. The telemetry on Callan's screen showed the incoming signal fraying at the edges. The wave patterns were erratic, jagged peaks and valleys that spelled death. He could see the space shears forming. They were terrifying phenomena, visible only when a gate malfunctioned. They looked like cracks in the air itself, black lightning that did not flash but stayed, tearing at the fabric of reality. They were whipping around the center of the gate ring, hungry for anything that tried to pass through. "Subject is entering the buffer," the AI announced. "Pattern integrity at 40%. Collapse imminent." Callan looked at the readouts. He knew the math. He knew the physics. The standard protocols were too slow. The automated systems were trying to solve a calculus equation while the house was burning down. If he let the computer handle this, whoever was coming through that gate would arrive in pieces. He looked at his hands. His gloved, grease-stained hands. "I am just a maintenance worker," he said through gritted teeth. "I just fix the toilets and the lights." "Subject integrity 30%, the AI counted down. "Fatal error in 5 seconds. "Damn it!" Callan ripped the gloves off his hands. He threw them to the floor. He vaulted over the console and ran to the center of the room, where the master control pillar stood. It was a thick column of pure resonating quartz, the manual interface for the gate. It was designed to be used by a team of 3 synchronized telepaths, or a high-level AI, or one anchor. Callan slammed his bare palms against the cold, vibrating surface of the quartz. The shock was immediate. It was not like electricity. It was like plunging his hands into a river of ice and fire simultaneously. His vision whitened. The station vanished. The room vanished. He was inside the data stream. He could feel the gate. It was not a machine to him. It was a living, breathing beast that was currently choking. He could feel the massive, frantic energy of the incoming traveler, a burning star of panic and pain. "Breathe," Callan commanded, not with his voice, but with his will. He forced his own heartbeat to slow. Thump, thump, thump. He projected that rhythm into the quartz. He became the metronome. The chaotic, screaming energy of the gate latched onto him. It found the stability of his pulse. He was the rock in the river. He was the anchor. He saw her then, not with his eyes, but with his mind. She was suspended in the void between spaces. She was enormous, a titan of muscle and armor, wrapped in a storm of golden energy. But the storm was tearing her apart. The space shears were hooking into her shadowy claws, trying to drag her into non-existence. "Got you," Callan gritted out. He twisted his hands on the quartz, physically wrestling the energy fields. On the physical plane, sparks showered from the pillar, singeing his hair. His skin began to smoke. "Stabilize," he ordered. "Match frequency, 7.4 gigahertz. Shift phase to blue spectrum." The gate resisted. It felt like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a spoon. The residual shadows, the distorted echoes of failed teleports, began to bleed into the control room. They were translucent humanoid shapes, with no faces, composed of static and malice. They circled him, drawn to the power he was channeling. "Get back," Callan growled, not breaking contact with the pillar. He pulsed a wave of rejection through the field, a psychic shove that sent the shadows scattering into the walls. He focused back on the traveler. She was close. He could feel her confusion, her agony. "Hold on," he said, his voice straining. "I am going to pull. This is going to hurt." He wrenched his hands back, fingers curled, as if gripping invisible ropes. The gate ring outside flared with a sound like a thunderclap that vibrated through the hull without air to carry it. The space shears snapped, retreating into the dark. A beam of solid light hammered into the receiving pad at the center of the control room. Callan was thrown backward. He hit the main console hard, sliding down to the floor. The quartz pillar was smoking, hairline fractures glowing red on its surface. For a moment, there was only the sound of Callan's ragged breathing and the hiss of cooling systems. Then the light on the pad faded. Kneeling there was a giant. She was at least 7 feet tall, perhaps taller. Her skin was the color of polished bronze, marked with faint, glowing geometric patterns that were slowly fading. She wore armor, made of a matte dark metal that looked organic, like grown chitin. A massive sword easily the length of Callan's entire body was strapped to her back. She was gasping for air, her hands braced on the floor. Smoke curled from her shoulders. Callan groaned and sat up, cradling his right hand. The skin was red and blistered, the palm blackened. "Well," Callan wheezed, leaning his head back against the console. "That was dramatic." The giant's head snapped up. Her eyes were solid gold, no pupils, burning with a fierce, predatory intelligence. She scanned the room instantly, threat assessment. She saw the shadows fading into the walls. She saw the smoking pillar. Finally, her gaze landed on the small, disheveled human man, sitting on the floor in a dirty jumpsuit. She tried to stand, stumbled, and went down on one knee. A growl of frustration rumbled deep in her chest. "Easy, big girl," Callan said, waving his good hand vaguely. "You are suffering from displacement sickness. Your molecules just got reshuffled like a deck of cards. Give it a minute." "Who?" Her voice was a tectonic rumble, deep and resonant. It sounded like stones grinding together in a cavern. "Who are you?" "The janitor," Callan said. "And let me tell you, I do not have a salary addendum for saving giant princesses. Or giant warriors. Whichever you are." She narrowed her eyes. The pain was clearly immense. He could see the tremors in her arms, but she forced herself to stand upright. She towered over the room, her helmetless head scraping the overhead displays. "You." She looked at the quartz pillar, then back at him. She looked at his burned hand. "You touched the core, bare-handed." "I slipped," Callan lied smoothly. "Clumsy. It is an occupational hazard." "Do not lie to me, human," she said, though her tone was less aggressive and more bewildered. She took a step toward him. The deck plates groaned under her weight. The gate was fracturing. The shears had me. I felt a grip, a mind. It was cold like iron. That was probably just the AC unit, Callan said, pushing himself to his feet. He felt dizzy. Using the anchor ability always drained him, left him feeling hollowed out. Look, whoever you are, you nearly blew up my station. My boss is going to be furious about the power bill. I am Tessara, she said. She placed a hand on her chest. Daughter of Dareth, shield of the high valleys. Great, Callan said. I am Callan, fixer of leaks, eater of cold rations. Look, Tessara, why did your people throw you through a destabilized gate? That is a creative way to execute someone. Tessara's face darkened. It was not an execution. It was an extraction. My unit was ambushed. The forward gate was compromised. They pushed me through to save the data I carry. She tapped a crystalline device embedded in her bracer. Right, Callan said. War, ambush, data, all the fun stuff. He turned away, walking toward the medical fabricator on the wall. I used to deal with that. Now I just deal with dust. He punched a code into the fabricator. It whirred and spat out a canister of dermal regeneration gel. He tossed it to her. For the burns, he said. Your armor is hot enough to cook an egg. She caught the canister with reflexes that were terrifyingly fast for someone who had just teleported across the galaxy. She looked at it then, at him. You are strange Callan who fixes leaks, she said. She did not apply the gel. She just watched him. You move like a soldier. You speak like a mechanic. But you manipulate the gate like a high priest of the flux. I have no idea what you are talking about, Callan said, turning his back to her to inspect the damaged pillar. He needed to hide his face. He had exposed too much. I just hit the machinery until it works. It is called percussive maintenance. There are shadow residuals in the walls, Tessara noted, pointing her chin at a dark stain on the bulkhead. They only manifest when an anchor forces a breach open. They are drawn to the soul that bridges the gap. We have a mold problem, Callan said flatly. It is a damp station. Tessara made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. She walked over to the viewport, looking out at the gate ring. My father will be sending a retrieval team. They will track my signature. Good, Callan said. They can pick you up and I can go back to my nap. You saved my life, she said. It was a statement, heavy and absolute. I saved my station, Callan corrected. You just happened to be the debris clogging the intake. She turned to face him. Her golden eyes seemed to peel back the layers of his sarcasm. I owe you a life debt. The Karathi do not forget. Forget it, Callan said. Seriously, just forget it. Before she could respond, the console beeped again. A proximity alarm. Ships emerging, the AI announced. Karathi configuration. 3 frigates and a royal transport. Hailing on all frequencies. That was fast, Callan muttered. They were waiting on the other side of the tear, Tessara said. She stood straighter, smoothing her features into a mask of stoic command. The pain vanished from her posture, replaced by regal arrogance. Opening docking bay 1, Callan said. Please tell them not to shoot anything. I just painted the airlock. 10 minutes later, the airlock hissed open. Callan stood by the controls arms, crossed trying to look invisible. Tessara stood in the center of the bay, a monument of bronze and shadow. A squad of Karathi warriors marched in. They were massive, though none quite as tall as Tessara. They wore full face masks and carried energy pikes that hummed with menace. They formed a protective circle around her instantly, their weapons facing outward. An older Karathi male walked through the ranks. He wore robes of woven heavy fiber instead of armor, and his face was deeply lined, his beard braided with metal rings. He bowed low to Tessara. My lady, the Emperor feared the worst. The gate was unstable, Callan, Tessara said, her voice echoing in the bay. But the transit was successful. The older Karathi Kalen looked around the bay. His eyes landed on Kalen. He looked at the human with disdain, seeing the grease, the patches, the messy hair. "This is the operator," Kalen asked. "This debris—" "Careful," Kalen muttered under his breath. "He is the one," Tessera said. "He manually stabilized the aperture." Kalen's eyes widened. He pulled a device from his robes and scanned the room. He scanned the lingering energy traces. Then he scanned Kalen. The device chirped. Kalen looked at the readout, then back at Kalen with a look of absolute shock. "The resonance signature matches," Kalen whispered. "It is a bond lock." "What now?" Kalen asked, stepping forward. The warriors suddenly shifted. They did not aim at him, but they turned their attention fully upon him. It was intense, like having a dozen heavy cannons swivel in your direction. "He touched the core," Kalen asked Tessera. "He anchored me," Tessera said. She looked at Kalen, and for the first time, there was a trace of apology in her golden eyes. "I tried to tell him not to." "I saved her life," Kalen protested. "And my station, is this how you say thank you, with scary looks and fancy words?" Kalen marched forward. He was fast for an old man. Before Kalen could react, the Karathi seized his left wrist. His grip was like a hydraulic clamp. "Hey, hands off the merchandise!" Kalen yelped, trying to yank his arm back. Kalen ignored him. He produced a bracelet from his sleeve. It was not metal, but a single, seamless ring of transparent crystal, swirling with blue smoke inside. "By the laws of the gate," Kalen intoned, his voice solemn. "The anchor binds the traveler. The life saved is the life owed. The energy is shared." He snapped the bracelet onto Kalen's wrist. It shrank instantly, fitting tight against his skin. A sharp sting like a needle pricked his vein. The blue smoke inside the crystal turned red. "Ow!" Kalen shouted. "What is this A-tracker?" "It is a bond mark," Kalen said, releasing him. "You have intertwined your essence with the Princess Tessera core in the space between worlds. You dragged her from the void. You claimed her." "I did not claim anyone," Kalen looked frantically at Tessera. "Tell him I just pulled a lever metaphorically," Tessera sighed. "It is the old law, Kalen. You acted as an anchor. You saved a royal of the blood from the shears. The penalty for failure was death. The reward for success is integration." "Integration?" Kalen felt a cold pit open in his stomach. "You must accompany us," Kalen said. "The Emperor must see the man who has bound himself to his daughter." "Now, wait a minute." Kalen backed away. "I have a job. I have a lizard to feed. I have a crack in the wall I need to ignore. I am not going anywhere." "You have no choice," Kalen said. "The bond is active. If you move more than 100 kilometers from her, before the stabilization ritual is complete, the feedback loop will stop your heart." Kalen stared at the bracelet. He stared at Kalen. Finally, he looked up at Tessera. She shrugged a gesture that looked incredibly human on her giant frame. "I told you," she said softly. "The Karathi do not forget." Kalen looked around his empty, quiet docking bay. He looked at the safety of his boring, lonely life, slipping away like air out of an airlock. "I hate Wednesdays," Kalen said. "Bring him," Tessera ordered. Two warriors stepped forward gently but firmly, taking Kalen by the arms. As they marched him toward the Karathi transport, Kalen looked back one last time. Up on a hydraulic pipe, the blue lizard was watching him. "You are in charge, Scales," Kalen called out. "Do not let the plants die." The airlock cycled shut, sealing the silence behind him. Ahead, the stars of the Karathi sector waited, and Kalen had a sinking feeling that he had just fixed his last leak. The sensation of traveling through a destabilized wormhole was distinctly different from a standard transit. A normal jump felt like a hiccup, a momentary skip in the heartbeat of the universe, where one ceased to exist at point A and immediately resumed existing at point B. But this transit riding the wake of a collapsing field inside a Korathi military transport, felt like being pushed through a sieve made of electrified glass. For most beings, the sensation lasted less than a second. For Callan Ward, whose nervous system had been chemically and surgically tuned during the war to perceive the micro-fluctuations of gate energy, it lasted for an eternity. He saw the walls of the tunnel buckling. He saw the colors of hyperspace bleeding from violet to a sickly, bruised gray. He felt the ship rattling not just physically, but existentially, as if the universe was debating whether or not to let them keep their atomic structure. Then, with a sound like a hammer striking a wet drum, reality snapped back into place. Callan lurched forward in his restraints, his stomach trying to exit through his throat. He swallowed hard, forcing the bile down, and took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked around the troop bay. The massive Korathi warriors were sitting stone still, their helmets locked in place, seemingly unaffected. Only the slight whitening of their knuckles on their energy pikes betrayed their tension. Tessara sat across from him. She had not strapped herself in. She simply sat with her boots mag-locked to the deck, her arms crossed, riding out the turbulence like a statue weathering a storm. Her golden eyes were fixed on him. "You did not vomit," she noted. Her voice was a low rumble that vibrated through the metal bench Callan was sitting on. "I swallowed it," Callan lied, unbuckling his harness with shaking hands. "It is a polite human custom. We prefer to keep our lunch on the inside." "The transit was rough," Tessara admitted. She tapped the crystalline display on her wrist. 0.4% deviation. We nearly exited inside a moon. 0.43, Callan corrected automatically, then caught himself. He cleared his throat. "I mean, it felt bumpy, like a bad suspension." The transport banked sharply, descending through the atmosphere. The viewports polarized, revealing the world below. Callan leaned forward despite the sudden increase in G-force that made his head feel like a bowling ball. Korath Prime. The homeworld of the giants. It was a world of stark, brutal beauty. There were no soft green forests or rolling blue oceans. Instead, the planet was a tapestry of jagged granite peaks, deep ochre canyons, and vast, flat plateaus of obsidian. The cities were not built on the ground. They were carved directly into the canyon walls, and mountain faces, colossal structures of stone and metal that defied gravity. "Gravity check," Callan groaned as the ship leveled out. He lifted his hand. It felt as if he were wearing a lead gauntlet. "Standard Korathi gravity. 1.5 times Earth standard. Wonderful. I am going to be 2 inches shorter by tomorrow." "You are already short," one of the guards muttered. "I heard that," Callan said. "And for the record, I am average height for my species. You people are just over-engineered." The ship touched down on a landing pad that jutted out from the side of a massive cliff face. The airlock hissed open, and the dry, thin air of the high altitude rushed in. It smelled of ozone, crushed rock, and distant wood smoke. "Move," Callan, the elder mage, ordered, nudging Callan with the butt of his staff. They marched him out. As Callan stepped onto the platform, his knees buckled. The gravity was oppressive. It pulled at his skin, his internal organs, his spine. He had to lock his legs and force his back straight, refusing to hunch over. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him crawl. They were in a massive valley, known as the Stone Cradle. All around them, statues of ancient warriors carved from the living rock of the mountains looked down with silent judgment. The scale of everything was overwhelming. The steps leading up to the Great Hall were cut for legs twice the length of his own. The doors were 50 feet high, made of ironwood and reinforced with gold. Hundreds of Korathi were gathered in the plaza. They were silent, a sea of bronze skin and dark armor. As Tessara walked past, they thumped their fists against their chest plates, a rhythmic thundering sound that echoed off the canyon walls. It was a hero's welcome. But when their eyes landed on Callan, the rhythm faltered. Confusion rippled through the crowd. They saw the small, pale figure in a grease-stained gray jumpsuit shuffling along under the weight of their world, wearing the glowing bond mark on his wrist. Tessara noticed the stares. She slowed her pace, matching Callan's struggle. It was a subtle gesture, but Callan caught it. She was shielding him from the visual ridicule, placing her massive bulk between him and the worst of the crowd. "Head up, mechanic," she whispered, not looking at him. "If you trip, they will think you are bowing. We do not bow to the mob." "I am not bowing," Callan wheezed, sweat stinging his eyes. "I am just inspecting the floor. Nice masonry. Very consistent." They reached the massive doors. Callan raised his staff, and the heavy wood groaned open. The throne room was a cavern, literally. It was a natural hollow inside the mountain, smoothed and polished over 10,000 years. Bioluminescent moss grew in intricate patterns on the ceiling, casting a soft blue-green light that warred with the torches lining the walls. At the far end, upon a throne carved from a single geode of purple crystal, sat Emperor Dareth Kor. He was terrified. That was Callan's first thought. The Emperor was a mountain of a man, his beard white, and braided with gold, his shoulders wide enough to block a hallway. He wore armor that looked like it had seen actual battle, scratched and dented, not ceremonial parade gear. But his hands gripping the arms of the throne were trembling. When he saw Tessara, the Emperor stood up. The movement was so sudden that his guards flinched. "Tessara," he breathed. His voice was not the thunder of a ruler, but the gasp of a father. "Father," Tessara stepped forward. She dropped to one knee, her head bowed. For a moment, Callan thought the Emperor would maintain protocol. Instead, Dareth descended the steps of the dais, moving with a speed that belied his size, and hauled his daughter up, crushing her into an embrace that lifted her boots off the floor. "The relay said you were lost," Dareth said, his voice thick. "They said the signal scattered." "It did," Tessara said gently, extricating herself. She looked tired, the adrenaline of the journey fading. The gate destabilized. The sheer winds took the transport. I was the only one pushed through the buffer. Dareth's face hardened. The father vanished, replaced by the warlord. "And the others, gone," Tessara said softly. "Scattered to atoms." A heavy silence descended on the hall. Callan stood awkwardly to the side, feeling like an intruder at a funeral. He tried to look invisible, rubbing the sore skin around the crystal bracelet. "But you are here," Dareth said. "How the physics of a collapsed gate are absolute. Once the shear begins, nothing solid can emerge." "I had help," Tessara said, Tessara. She turned and pointed at Callan. Every eye in the room, generals, mages, advisors, guards, swiveled to the human. Dareth stared at Callan. He squinted, as if trying to decipher a smudge on a lens. That is a human. A laborer by the look of his attire." "His name is Callan Ward," Tessara said. "He was the operator at Starbridge Argent. When the signal failed, he did not abort. He entered the conduction chamber." The murmurs started again. Callan, the elder mage who had brought them, stepped forward, his face grave. "He did more than enter my Emperor," Callan announced. "He touched the core. Bare skin. No dampeners. No interface suit." The Emperor's eyebrows shot up. "He would be Ash." "He is not Ash," Callan said, lifting Callan's arm to display the bracelet. The crystal pulsed with a steady, rhythmic red light. He synchronized his biorhythm with the gate's flux. He anchored her pattern against the void. He pulled her back from the shear. Dareth looked from the bracelet to Callan's face. The Emperor walked closer, his heavy boots shaking the floor. He stopped 2 feet from Callan, towering over him like a falling building. The smell of hot metal and spices rolled off him. "You," Dareth rumbled. "You held the gate open." "A human mind cannot process the mathematical chaos of a shear." Callan looked up. His neck hurt. "Your Highness, or Your Majesty, I am not sure of the protocol. Look, I just improvised." The machine was screaming. "I gave it a rhythm to follow. It is just tuning an engine. A very loud, angry engine. "Tuning," Dareth repeated. He looked at Kalen. "Is the bond genuine?" "The crystal does not lie," Kalen said. "The energy that flows in the princess also flows in him. If she dies, he dies. If he dies, she suffers. He risked his existence to anchor hers. By the ancient laws of the first gate, the debt is absolute." Dareth exhaled a long, whistling breath through his nose. He looked at his daughter, then at the small, disheveled man. He rubbed his face with a massive hand. "This is unexpected," Dareth muttered. Then he straightened up and addressed the hall, his voice projecting to the farthest corners. "Hear me, people of Korath." The room went deathly silent. "The void sought to claim my blood," Dareth shouted. "But a stranger stood between the dark and the daughter of the throne. He gave his life force to be her anchor. The law is clear. The law is absolute." He pointed a finger at Kalen. "This man, Kalen Ward, has performed the rite of the anchor. He has bound his soul to Tessara Kor. Therefore, let it be known," Dareth paused, looking slightly pained but pressed on, "that he is now part of the imperial blood. He has claimed the right of the gateway bond. By the setting of the twin suns, preparations for the union shall begin." Kalen blinked. He waited for the translation to make sense. "Union," Kalen asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Union, like a trade agreement, or union like—" "Marriage," Tessara whispered, her face turning a dark, burnished copper color. She refused to look at him. "Whoa, hold on!" Kalen stepped back, holding his hands up. "Time out. Marriage." "Nobody said anything about marriage. I thought bond meant like a prisoner bond. Or a bail bond. I did not sign up for the interplanetary matrimony package." "Do you refuse the honor?" A general stepped forward, his hand drifting to the hilt of his sword. "To refuse the bond is to say the life of the princess was not worth saving. It is a mortal insult to the Emperor." Kalen looked at the sword. He looked at the Emperor's stern face. He looked at Tessara, who was staring at the floor, humiliated, but trapped by her own culture. Kalen stammered. "I am just saying we have not even had a first date. I do not even know her favorite color. It is gold, right? Everything here is gold." "It is blue," Tessara said through gritted teeth. "Like the sky of a world with water." "See," Kalen gestured frantically. "Incompatible, I like gray. I live on a gray station. I wear gray clothes." Dareth stepped in, his voice lowering to a dangerous rumble. "Kalen Ward, this is not a request. The bond is a biological and metaphysical reality now. If we sever it forcefully, the feedback could lobotomize you both. The union ritual stabilizes the connection. It allows you to exist separately, without the resonance killing you." "Oh," Kalen said. "So it is get married or die." "Essentially," Dareth said. "Welcome to the family." The guest quarters were larger than the entire hangar bay of Starbridge Argent. The bed was the size of a shuttle landing pad and covered in furs from beasts Kalen hoped he would never meet. Kalen sat on the edge of the stone mattress, staring at his boots. He felt numb. The door, a slab of stone balanced on silent hinges, slid open. Tessara entered. She had removed her armor, wearing a simple tunic of white silk that made her look less like a tank and more like a statue of a goddess. She looked uncomfortable, her arms wrapped around herself. "I apologize," she said stiffly. Kalen looked up. "For which part? The kidnapping? The death threats? Or the surprise wedding to a mechanic you just met?" "For the embarrassment," she said, sitting on a stone bench across the room. The furniture groaned. "I did not know my father would invoke the old law so publicly. He is traditional, and he is scared. He almost lost me." "He seems nice," Kalen said dryly, "for a man who threatened to execute me if I did not marry you." "He would not have executed you," Tessara said. Then she paused. "Probably not, maybe just exile." Exile sounds nice right now, Kalen sighed. He looked at the bracelet. So this thing, does it connect us telepathically, empathically? Tessara corrected. I do not hear your thoughts. Thank the stars for that. But I feel your tone. Right now, you feel like a vibrating coil of anxiety and sarcasm. That is my baseline setting, Callan said. Look, Tessara, we need to figure this out. I cannot stay here. I have a life. Well, I have a lizard and a cracked wall, but it is my life. You cannot leave, Tessara said. Not until the stabilizers are calibrated. If you go through a gate now, the bond will tear the wormhole apart. You are a walking navigational hazard. Callan rubbed his face. Fine. So I am stuck here. For how long? Until the mages can weave a suppression field, she said. A week, maybe 2. 2 weeks, Callan muttered. I can do 2 weeks. I just have to avoid getting married. The door chime sounded again. A servant, a smaller Karathi, which meant he was only 6.5 feet tall, entered and bowed. The Emperor requests the presence of the Lord Callan, the servant squeaked. Lord Callan, Callan repeated. It sounds like a bad joke. He followed the servant, leaving Tessara alone in the room. As the door closed, he felt a sudden pang of loneliness, sharp and cold. He stopped, touching his chest. That is not me, he realized. He looked back at the door. That was her. Beneath the armor and the stoic face, the giant princess was terrifyingly lonely. The Emperor was not on his throne. He was in a war room surrounded by holographic star maps. When Callan entered, Dareth waved the guards away. Come closer, Anchor, Dareth said. Callan approached the table. The map showed a sector of space near the Karathi border. Red icons blinked in a chaotic pattern. You have a technical mind, Dareth said. My mages speak in riddles and prophecies. My generals speak in casualty counts. I need an engineer. Look at this. He tapped the table. A recording began to play. It was a sensor log from a remote outpost. The data was raw waveforms and energy spikes. This gate, Dareth pointed to a jagged line on the graph. It did not just fail. It was consumed. Callan looked at the data. He froze. The pattern was unmistakable. It looked like a series of rhythmic bites taken out of the energy field. The frequency oscillated in a triple-beat measure. Thump, thump, scream, thump, thump, scream. Callan knew this sound. He heard it in his nightmares. He had heard it 10 years ago during the Battle of the Cinderbelt, when the human coalition tried to overcharge a gate to move a fleet behind enemy lines. He had been the one to calculate the yield. He had been the one to say it is safe. It had not been safe. The gate had screamed, and then the dark had come alive. Well, Dareth asked, watching him closely. What do you see? Callan's heart hammered against his ribs. If he told the truth that this was a phenomenon called the Hollow Tide, a man-made horror born from a human mistake, the Karathi would not just execute him. They would declare war on humanity. It looks like signal degradation, Callan lied. His voice was steady, a skill honed by years of hiding. Space rats, energy parasites. We get them in the outer rim. They chew on the relays. Parasites, Dareth repeated skeptically. That consume an entire station in 4 minutes. Big rats, Callan said. I can write a patch for your sensor grid. Filter out the noise. It will stop the false alarms. Dareth stared at him for a long moment. Callan forced himself not to blink, not to look away. Finally, the Emperor nodded. Do it. But Callan Ward, Dareth leaned in. Do not think I am a fool. I know a man who is hiding something. For now, you are family. But family can still be dangerous. The next 3 days were a blur of surreal torment. Karathi courtship, Callan discovered, involved a lot of public eating and public fighting. The feast of the second son was held in the open-air courtyard. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted beasts that looked like dinosaurs. Callan sat next to Tessara at the head table. His plate contained a slab of meat, larger than his head. Eat, Tessara whispered. "It is an insult to the hunters if you do not finish." "It is gray," Callan whispered back, poking it with a knife that was essentially a machete. "And it is vibrating." "It is nerve meat," she explained. "It twitches until you chew it. It is a delicacy." "I miss protein paste," Callan whimpered. He saw the courtiers watching him, waiting for the small human to fail. He cut a piece, put it in his mouth and chewed. It tasted like copper and electricity. He swallowed, smiled tightly at the room, and gave a thumbs up. "Delicious," he croaked. "Tastes like victory." Tessara nudged his leg with hers under the table. He looked at her. She slid a small flask toward him behind a bowl of fruit. "Strong wine," she murmured. "It numbs the tongue." "You are an angel," Callan whispered, taking a swig. It burned like rocket fuel, but it stopped the meat from tasting like a battery. The next day was the testing of the bond. This involved Callan, standing in the center of a sand arena, while Tessara sparred with 3 of her father's elite guards. The logic apparently was that Callan had to witness her strength to understand the value of the life he was bound to. Tessara moved like a storm. She was fast, brutal, and efficient. Her practice sword, a heavy rod of ironwood, blurred as she parried 3 attackers at once. She swept the legs of one, slammed her shoulder into the chest of another, and disarmed the third with a twist of her wrist. Callan sat in the stands, analyzing. "She favors her right side," he noted. "Old injury on the left hip. No, she is guarding the flank. She fights defensively, even when attacking. She is used to being outnumbered." When the match ended, Tessara was breathing hard, sweat glistening on her bronze skin. She looked up at the royal box, locking eyes with Callan. She waited for his reaction. Most suitors would be applauding her beauty. Most warriors would be critiquing her form. Callan stood up and made a T-shape with his hands. "Time out," he yelled down. "You are overextending on the lunge. If the third guy had a mag whip, you would have lost an eyebrow." The crowd went silent. Nobody criticized the princess. Tessara stared at him. Then slowly, a grin spread across her face. It was not a polite court smile. It was a jagged, real smile. "Come down here and show me mechanic," she challenged. "Not a chance," Callan yelled back. "I am fragile. I will break if you look at me too hard." Laughter rippled through the crowd. It was not mocking this time. It was amused. He had passed a test he did not know he was taking. That night, Callan found Tessara on the balcony of the palace overlooking the valley. The twin moons were full, casting long double shadows across the stone. She was leaning on the railing, looking small for the first time. "You recognize the data logs," she said without turning around. Callan froze. He walked up beside her, careful not to touch the railing. The drop was 2,000 feet. "I do not know what you mean," he said. "You are a terrible liar, Callan," she said. "You have a tell. When you lie, you tap your left thumb against your index finger. You did it in the war room. You did it when you told my father it was rats." Callan jammed his hands into his pockets. "You represent a very observant species." "What is it?" she asked, turning to face him. "The thing eating the gates. It is not natural, is it?" Callan looked at the moons. He could tell her. He could tell her that humanity, in its desperation to win a losing war against the insectoid swarms of the outer rim, had tried to weaponize the space between stars. That he had been one of the architects. That the hollow tide was the ghosts of that mistake coming back to eat reality. "It is bad," he said simply. "But I need to be sure before I say more." "Why do you hide your strength?" she asked. "You play the fool." "The weakling. But you anchored a Class 5 vortex. You analyze combat vectors like a general. Who were you, Callan, before you were a janitor?" "I was nobody," Callan said softly. "Just a man who made too many decisions. Now I prefer to fix things that stay fixed." "I am tired of making decisions too," Tessara admitted. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Everyone sees the armor, the princess, the symbol. No one asks if I want to be the shield. Maybe I just want to be. I see you, Callan said. The words came out before he could stop them. Tessara looked at him. The bond on their wrists pulsed a slow, warm beat. You are loud, Tessara Kor, Callan said. You are heavy. You take up too much space. You are stubborn. And you eat terrible meat, Tessara chuckled, a sound like gravel shifting. But, Callan continued, looking her in the eye, you are solid. In a universe that keeps falling apart, you are the most solid thing I have met. I do not want to marry you. But I do not mind standing next to you. Tessara reached out. Her hand, large enough to crush his skull, gently touched his shoulder. I do not want to marry you either, little mechanic, she said. But you are surprisingly durable. The moment was fragile, suspended in the moonlight. It was not love, not yet. But it was understanding. Two tired soldiers recognizing each other across a cultural divide. Then, the siren wailed. It was a low, mournful sound that rose from the city below. The palace defenses activated shields, snapping into place with a thunderous crack. Callan the mage burst onto the balcony, his robes flying. My lord, my lady, he gasped. The outpost at Veiled Ridge. It is gone. Gone. Tessara snapped into commander mode instantly. Communications down. No, Callan said, his face pale. The outpost is physically gone. The mountain it stood on was erased, and the anomaly is spreading toward the primary trade gate. Callan felt the blood drain from his face. The hollow tide was not just gnawing anymore. It was feeding. Dareth marched onto the balcony behind the mage. He was fully armored now. Tessara, the Emperor commanded. Take the First Legion. Secure the trade gate. If that gate falls, the shockwave will collapse the entire sector network. I will lead the vanguard, Tessara slammed her fist to her chest. And take him, Dareth pointed at Callan. Father, no, Tessara argued. It is a combat zone. He is unarmored. He is the only one who recognized the pattern, Dareth said grimly. And he is bound to you. Where you go, he goes. He will serve as your gate advisor. Dareth looked at Callan. No more rats, Callan Ward. If you know how to stop this, you will use that knowledge. Or you will die with my daughter. Callan looked at the horizon. He could see the distant flicker of the trade gate, a beacon in the night. I need a suit, Callan said, his voice hard. And a datapad with direct access to the core processor. And I need a gun. A gun, Callan scoffed. We use pikes. I am human, Callan said, walking toward the door. We like to shoot things from a distance. Let's go. Tessara watched him walk away. The slouch was gone. The janitor was gone. The soldier had returned and he looked terrified. She followed him. They were marching into the dark, bound by a crystal chain and a secret that could destroy them both. The wind at Veiled Ridge did not howl. It whimpered. The transport ship touched down on the blackened landing pad, its thrusters kicking up swirls of ash that did not settle the way gravity dictated. Instead of falling, the dust motes hung suspended in the air, vibrating in geometric patterns before dissolving into nothingness. Callan Ward stepped off the ramp first, his boots crunching on the obsidian ground. He wore a modified enviro suit, now a bulky thing of reinforced polymer, that made him look like a child wearing his father's work clothes, especially standing next to the towering armored form of Tessara Kor. Atmosphere is breathable, Callan said, checking the readout on his wrist. But the local physics are suggestion only. Watch your step, princess. The ground might decide it is a liquid. Tessara ignored the jab. She pulled her massive sword from the magnetic lock on her back. The blade, 6 feet of folded stellar steel, hummed with a low resonance. Where is the garrison? She asked, scanning the ruined outpost. Veiled Ridge was supposed to be a fortress, a collection of bunkers carved into the granite spine of the mountain range. Now it looked like a broken mirror. The bunkers were not destroyed in the conventional sense. They were fragmented. Huge chunks of the mountain were missing, replaced by perfect spheres, of absolute silence where the light bent and twisted. Over there, Callan pointed to the main gate control bunker. Life signs. Faint. They moved through the wreckage. Callan kept his eyes on his scanner, but he could feel it. The wrongness. It was an itch behind his eyes, a taste of copper and old blood in his mouth. They found the survivors huddled in the remains of the mess hall. There were 3 of them, massive Karathi warriors reduced to trembling children. Their armor was pitted not by acid, but by age, as if they had sat there for 1,000 years instead of a few hours. "Report," Tessara commanded, her voice gentle but firm. One of the soldiers looked up. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown out. "The song," he whispered. It sang in the silence. It took Corgan's name. It ate his name, and then he was gone. "Who attacked you?" Tessara asked, kneeling beside him. "The tide," the soldier wept. "The empty tide." Callan turned away, walking toward the main console bank on the far wall. It was sparked and smoking, but the core drive was still active. He pulled a cable from his suit and jacked in. "Do not listen to them," Callan muttered to himself. "Focus on the math. Math does not weep." He pulled up the sensor logs from the moment of the attack. The screen flooded with data. Most of it was garbage sensor ghosts, impossible readings where energy spiked to infinity and dropped to absolute zero in the same nanosecond. But underneath the chaos, there was a rhythm. Thump, thump, scream, thump, thump, scream. Callan froze. His hand resting on the console spasmed. He knew this rhythm. He had not heard it in 10 years, not since the Battle of the Cinder Belt. It was the sound of a spatial tear trying to heal itself and failing. It was the heartbeat of a dimensional overdose. "No," Callan breathed. "It cannot be here. That sector was quarantined. We sealed it." He adjusted the audio filters, isolating the background radiation. The sound became clearer. It was a low, undulating pulsation, like a heart beating underwater. To anyone else, it was just static. To Callan, who had spent 3 years connected to the neural link of a gatebreaker, Dreadnought, it was a song. It was the song of the weapon he had helped build. "Callan," Tessara's voice, cut through his paralysis. He jumped, ripping the cable out. He turned to find her standing right behind him, her golden eyes narrowed. "Your heart rate just spiked to 180 beats per minute, she said, glancing at the biomonitor on his suit collar. "And you are sweating." "It is hot in this suit," Callan said, forcing a crooked grin. "And your friend over there is telling ghost stories. I have an active imagination." "You were listening to the logs," Tessara said. She stepped closer, looming over him. "You heard something. What was it?" "Interference," Callan lied. "Feedback loop. It sounds like screaming. Nasty stuff. Probably just the atmospheric scrubbers failing." Tessara studied him. She looked at his trembling hands, then at his eyes. She saw the fear there. Not the fear of a mechanic facing a breakdown, but the fear of a soldier recognizing the enemy. "You are lying," she stated. "That sound. You have heard it before." "I have heard a lot of things," Callan snapped, pushing past her. "I have heard engines explode. I have heard hull plates buckling. Right now I need to focus on fixing this field before whatever you eat your friends comes back for dessert." He walked toward the massive blast doors that led to the gate platform, hoping she would drop it. She did not. "Callan," she called after him, "if you know what this is, you must tell me. I cannot fight a ghost." "It is not a ghost!" Callan shouted, spinning around. The outburst surprised them both. He took a breath, reeling it in. "It is not a ghost, Tessara. It is a spatial anomaly, a hollow tide. It feeds on coherent energy fields, like shields, like generators, like living neural pathways." "And how do you know that?" she asked softly. Before Callan could answer, before he could invent a lie about reading it in a manual, or admit that he was one of the monsters who created it, the air in the room changed. The temperature plummeted. Frost instantly crystallized on the viewports. The light from the ceiling panels dimmed, turning a sickly, watery gray. The survivor in the corner began to scream. "It is back! The singing is back!" Callan looked at the blast doors. The heavy durasteel began to ripple like water. "Get back!" Callan roared, grabbing his datapad. "Energy signatures are spiking. It is coming through the wall." Through the wall, Tessara brought her sword up. "That is 3 feet of reinforced concrete. To this thing, concrete is just a suggestion." The blast doors dissolved. They did not explode. They simply ceased to be solid, turning into a cloud of metallic dust that vanished into the air. And then, the hollow tide entered. It was not a creature of flesh and bone. It was a phenomenon given malice. It looked like ribbons of vantablack silk, moving underwater, undulating and twisting. But where the ribbons touched the floor, the stone aged 10,000 years in a second, crumbling to dust. Where they touched the air, the light died. It flowed into the room, a silent tsunami of negation. "Open fire!" Tessara shouted to the remaining guards. The Korathi opened up with their energy pikes. Bolts of plasma slammed into the darkness. It was the worst thing they could have done. The hollow tide did not burn. It was absorbed. The plasma bolts hit the black ribbons and vanished, and the creature pulsed brighter, growing larger, feeding on the aggression. "Stop shooting!" Callan screamed, tapping frantically on his datapad. "It eats energy. You are just feeding it breakfast." One of the ribbons lashed out. It moved faster than the eye could follow. It struck the screaming survivor. There was no blood. The Korathi warrior simply turned gray, his edges blurring, and then he dissipated like smoke in a strong wind. "Fall back," Tessara ordered, positioning herself between her men and the entity. She swung her massive sword. The stellar steel blade, forged with gravity dampeners, bit into the darkness. Surprisingly, it connected. The ribbon recoiled, severing. "Physical impact works," Tessara yelled. "It has mass." "Only because it is condensing to feed," Callan shouted. He was running toward the secondary control junction, dodging tendrils of shadow. "Keep it busy. I need to scramble the local frequency." Tessara became a whirlwind of bronze and steel. She danced with the void, her sword carving arcs in the air. Every strike dispersed a ribbon, but 2 more grew in its place. She was fighting a hydra made of vacuum. Callan reached the junction box. He ripped the cover off and jammed his hands into the fiber optics. He didn't have time for the interface tool. He needed direct contact. Come on," he muttered, closing his eyes. He visualized the room. He felt the station's heartbeat. He felt the cold, hungry void of the hollow tide. It felt like a drain at the bottom of the universe, sucking everything down. Anchor point established, he thought. Now invert the polarity. He pushed a pulse of raw will into the system, trying to create a static field that would taste bad to the monster. Across the room, Tessara gasped. Callan's eyes snapped open. The hollow tide had ignored the guards. It had ignored the power generator. It had realized who the biggest source of energy in the room was. A massive, thick tentacle of darkness had wrapped around Tessara's waist. It lifted her into the air. She hacked at it, but her sword arm was pinned. "Tessara!" Callan screamed. The tide began to feed. Tessara's golden armor started to turn gray. Her skin, vibrant bronze, began to flicker. She was becoming transparent. She was being pulled out of reality, just like at the Starbridge. "No," Callan growled. "Not again." He abandoned the junction box. He sprinted across the room. He did not have a weapon. He did not have a plan. He just had the bond. He could feel her terror through the link. It was not fear of death. It was fear of erasure. Callan slid onto his knees, sliding under the flailing ribbons, and slammed his hands onto the floor, directly beneath where she was suspended. "Anchor mode absolute," he gritted out. He did not use the station's power this time. He used his own. He reached down into the well of his own bioenergy, the reserve that kept his heart beating and his neurons firing, and he threw it all outward. A dome of blue light erupted from him, encompassing himself and Tessara. The hollow tide shrieked a sound, felt in the teeth, not heard by the ears. The blue light burned the darkness like acid. "I have you," Callan yelled, his voice distorted by the energy field. "I am the nail, I am the rock. You do not move unless I say you move." He grabbed Tessara's boot. The physical contact sealed the circuit. He pulled. Not with his muscles, but with his mind. He pulled her concept of self back from the brink of oblivion. The darkness fought back. It poured into Callan's mind. Suddenly, he was not on Veiled Ridge. He was back in the Cinder Belt. The sky was burning. The gate was screaming. He was standing at the console, watching the overload readout climb to 300%. Abort, 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 flashing in red. And the screams. Millions of them. The civilian convoy they were supposed to transport. The soldiers. They were all screaming as the gate turned inside out. "I am sorry," Callan wept in the vision. "I just wanted to end the war." Callan, Tessara's voice, shattered the memory. Callan snapped back to the present. He was kneeling on the floor of the outpost. Blood was dripping from his nose. Above him, Tessara had fallen free of the tentacle landing in a crouch. She was solid again. The hollow tide recoiled wary of the blue fire surrounding the human. "It is confused," Callan panted, wiping the blood from his lip. "It remembers me." Tessara looked at him. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of horror and awe. "You said the screams," she whispered. "You said millions of screams stopping at once. You were there, at the Cinder event." Callan looked at her. He saw the realization dawning. He saw the betrayal starting to form. "We can talk about my resume later," Callan said, his voice raspy. "Right now, we need to kill this thing." "It cannot be killed," Tessara said, raising her sword though her hand trembled. "It absorbs energy." "It absorbs ordered energy," Callan said. His brain was working fast, fueled by adrenaline and guilt. "It likes structure. It eats patterns. So we give it garbage. We give it chaos." He pointed to the main gate ring outside, visible through the shattered wall. "The gate has a diagnostic loop," Callan explained. "It cycles energy in a Mobius strip. Infinite movement, zero destination. It is useless energy. Static. So we turn the gate on, lock it into diagnostic mode, and remove the safety limiters," Callan said. "We create an all-you-can-eat buffet of nothing." "The gate is 200 meters away," Tessara said, dodging a lash of shadow. "The controls are here." "I can hotwire it from here," Callan said. "But someone has to make sure that thing follows the scent. Someone has to be the bait." Tessara looked at the monster, then at the gate. She nodded. "I am the shield," she said. "I will draw it out." "Tessara, wait." Callan reached for her. "If it touches you again, then anchor me again, mechanic," she said. There was no warmth in her voice now, only duty. She turned and charged, not at the monster, but past it, toward the hole in the wall. She slammed her sword against her shield, creating a ringing gong of sound. "Hey, Shadow Spawn!" she roared. "I am the blood of kings. I am the feast you cannot swallow. Come and take me." The hollow tide turned. It sensed the power in her. It sensed the defiance. It flowed after her, a river of night, pouring out of the bunker. Callan scrambled to the console. His fingers flew across the shattered keys. "Come on, Mother," he muttered to the local AI. "Wake up, bypass safeties, initiate diagnostic loop alpha, maximize output." Outside, the massive stone ring of the gate began to hum. It did not glow the usual violet. It glowed a sickly, erratic yellow. Tessara stood directly in front of the gate. The monster reared up a wave of darkness 50 feet high, ready to crash down on her. "Now, Callan!" she screamed. Callan hit the enter key. "Eat this!" The gate activated. It did not open a wormhole. Instead, it generated a chaotic sphere of raw, unshaped energy. It was a paradox field energy that existed and didn't exist simultaneously. The hollow tide lunged for Tessara, but the pull of the gate was stronger. The monster was drawn into the yellow vortex. It tried to feed, but there was no pattern to consume. It was like trying to drink sand. The creature shrieked a sound of frustration and gluttony turning to pain. It was pulled, stretching like taffy, into the center of the ring. "Run, Tessara!" Callan yelled over the comms. She dove to the side, rolling behind a slab of granite. The hollow tide was sucked into the diagnostic loop. It spun faster and faster, a black streak in the yellow storm, until it was stretched so thin it lost cohesion. With a final silent flash, the loop collapsed, dissipating the energy into harmless background radiation. The silence returned to Veiled Ridge. But this time, it was just normal silence. The wind howled again, sounding like wind. Callan slumped against the console. His nose was bleeding freely now. His vision blurred. He felt the heavy footsteps approaching. Tessara walked into the room. She was covered in gray dust. Her armor was scratched. She looked like a goddess of war who had just crawled out of a grave. She didn't check the survivors. She walked straight to Callan. She reached down, grabbed the front of his envirosuit, and hoisted him up until his feet dangled off the floor. She slammed him against the wall. "The Cinder Belt," she hissed. Her face was inches from his. 10 years ago, the Human Coalition tried to jump a fleet to the Karathi rear lines. They overloaded the Sector 7 gate. It created the first hollow tide. It wiped out 3 systems. It killed my mother. Callan didn't struggle. He hung there limp and exhausted. He looked into her furious golden eyes. "Yes," he whispered. "You were there," she said. It was an accusation. "I was the chief engineer," Callan said. The words tasted like ash. "I wrote the algorithm. I told them the gate could hold the surge. I was arrogant. I was wrong." Tessara's hand tightened on his suit. The servos in her gauntlet whined. She could crush his chest with a twitch of her finger. "You killed them," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You created this plague." "Yes," Callan repeated. "And I have spent every day since then trying to fix it. Why do you think I work at the edge of space? Why do you think I learned to be an anchor?" "I am trying to close the doors I opened." Tessara stared at him. The rage was there, burning hot, but beneath it, there was confusion and pain. She looked at the bond bracelet on his wrist. It was pulsing rapidly, syncing with her own racing heart. She could feel his remorse. It was not a lie. It was a crushing physical weight of guilt that mirrored her own grief. She let him go. Callan dropped to the floor, coughing. Tessara turned her back on him. She walked to the broken window and looked out at the dead outpost. "We are alive," she said, her voice cold and distant. "That is all that matters for the report." "Tessara," Callan began reaching out. "Do not," she snapped. "Do not speak to me of feelings, Callan Ward. You are my bondmate by law. You are my advisor by order of the Emperor. But do not think you are my friend." Callan lowered his hand. The distance between them, despite the physical room being small, felt like light years. They waited in the ruined control room for 3 hours until the retrieval ships arrived. They sat on opposite sides of the room. At one point, breaking the heavy silence, Tessara spoke. She did not look at him. "I did not hate the idea," she said softly. Callan looked up. "What?" "The bond," she said. "When we were training. When you made me laugh. I thought perhaps this was not a curse. I thought perhaps the universe had given me someone who understood the weight of duty." She turned her head slightly, just enough for him to see the shine of a tear on her bronze cheek. "I almost trusted you," she said. The words hit Callan harder than the gravity of her world. He opened his mouth to explain, to tell her that he had been young, that he had been following orders, that he would give anything to take it back. But he said nothing. Excuses would not bring her mother back. "I am sorry," was all he said. The return to Korath Prime was a blur of noise and color that made Callan nauseous. News of the victory at Veiled Ridge had traveled faster than their ship. When they landed, the stone cradle was packed with thousands of cheering citizens. They chanted Tessara's name. They chanted the anchor. Dareth Kor met them at the landing pad. The Emperor looked relieved, proud, and terrified all at once. "You did it," Dareth boomed, clasping Tessara's shoulder. "The mages say the anomaly was dispersed. You saved the trade route." He looked at Callan. For the first time there was genuine respect in the Emperor's eyes. "And you, Callan Ward," Dareth said. "You stood in the face of the void. You held the line." Callan stood there, still wearing his dirty, blood-stained envirosuit. He felt like a fraud. He felt like a criminal being given a medal for putting out a fire he had started. "It was a team effort," Callan said flatly. Dareth raised his hands to the crowd. "Witness," the Emperor bellowed. "The bond was forced by accident, but now it is forged in fire. The blood of the human and the blood of the Korathi have spilled together to protect our world." The crowd roared. "Let there be no doubt," Dareth declared. "The union is not just law, it is destiny. The wedding shall be held in 3 days. The savior of the gate shall sit beside the daughter of the throne." Tessara stood rigid as a statue. She looked out at the adoring crowd, then at her father, and finally at Callan. Her face was a mask of perfect cold marble. "As you command, father," she said. She turned and marched toward the palace, not waiting for Callan. Callan watched her go. The cheering of the crowd sounded like the screaming of the gate in his memories. He looked down at the crystal bond on his wrist. It felt heavy. It felt like a shackle. He was a hero to them. But to the woman he was about to marry, he was the monster under the bed. 3 days, Callan whispered to the wind. 3 days to save the world, or 3 days to lose everything. He followed the guards toward the palace, walking into the shadow of his own making. The hollow tide was gone from Veiled Ridge, but a different kind of darkness was settling over the House of Kor. The stone chair was designed for a being who stood 8 feet tall and weighed 400 pounds. For Callan Ward, it was less a piece of furniture and more a mountaineering challenge. He stood before the high table in the great hall of Korath, looking at the seat that had been assigned to him. It was the 3rd night since their return from Veiled Ridge. The adrenaline of the battle had faded, replaced by the crushing weight of court etiquette and the silent growing chasm between him and Tessara. "You have to step on the crossbar," Tessara whispered. She was standing next to him, radiant in a gown of woven gold mesh that looked like liquid armor. She was not looking at him, her gaze fixed on the Emperor at the head of the table. "Left foot on the bar hoist pivot sit. Do not scramble." "I do not scramble," Callan muttered, gripping the edge of the table which was level with his chest. "I ascend with tactical dignity." He performed the maneuver, hauling himself up. For a brief second, his legs dangled like a child's before he scooted back enough to rest his boots on the support strut. He smoothed his tunic, a scratchy velvet affair that Callan the mage had insisted was noble attire, but actually made Callan look like a decorative pillow. "Safe arrival," Callan exhaled, grabbing his goblet. It was the size of a bucket. "Do not drink too much," Tessara murmured. "It is fermented moss wine. For a human, 3 sips is courage. 5 sips is a coma." "I am aiming for somewhere in between," Callan said, taking a cautious sip. "Maybe just enough to forget that every person in this room is wondering why the princess brought a pet to dinner." Tessara stiffened slightly. "They do not see a pet. They see an anchor. You saved the outpost." "I cleaned up a mess," Callan corrected, his voice dropping. "There is a difference." The tension that had started in the ruins of Veiled Ridge sat between them like a physical object. Tessara knew he was hiding the full truth of the hollow tide. She knew he had recognized the scream of the void. But since that moment in the control room, She had not pressed him. Instead, she had retreated behind a wall of polite, terrifying efficiency. They were a couple for the cameras and strangers in the hallway. The feast began. Servants carried in platters of roast rock boar, the meat still sizzling on heated volcanic stones. The noise in the hall was deafening laughter that sounded like rockfalls arguments that sounded like thunder. "So," Callan said, trying to bridge the gap as he sawed at a piece of meat with a knife that was essentially a short sword. "What is on the schedule for tomorrow? More staring contest with the generals, or perhaps a light jog up a vertical cliff?" "Balance training," Tessara said, skewering a 3-pound steak effortlessly. "You move wrong in this gravity. You fight the pull instead of riding it. It exhausts your heart." "My heart is already exhausted," Callan said. Tessara paused her fork halfway to her mouth. She looked at him, then really looked at him, her golden eyes searching his face. For a second, the mask slipped. "Then tell me the truth," she whispered so low that even the keen ears of the guards behind them could not hear. "Lighten the load, Callan. Tell me what you are carrying." Callan gripped his knife until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. He wanted to tell her that he was not just a mechanic, that he was the former chief architect of the Coalition's Gate Division, that he was the man who had authorized the Cinder Protocol, the desperate, arrogant gamble to overcharge the gates, to end a losing war. A gamble that had torn a hole in reality and killed millions, including the timeline, suggested her mother. If he told her the bond would not save him, she would hate him, not with the cold anger of a princess, but with the fury of a daughter. "I told you," Callan lied, looking at his plate. "I just have sensitive ears. War leaves scars." Tessara stared at him for 3 seconds. Then, the mask slammed back down. "We start training at dawn," she said coldly. "Do not be late." The training deck was a slab of granite jutting out over the abyss of the canyon, open to the thin, cold air. The twin suns were just cresting the horizon, painting the sky in bands of violent violet and orange. Callan was sweating. He was trying to walk across a narrow beam while Tessara threw weighted sandbags at him. "Center of gravity is lower," she barked. "You are walking like a bird. Heavy steps root yourself." She hurled a bag. It hit Callan in the chest. He wheezed, flailing his arms, and toppled off the beam. He hit the mat hard, the breath driven out of him. "I hate this planet," Callan gasped, staring up at the sky. "Everything is heavy. The air is heavy. The food is heavy. The women are heavy." A shadow fell over him. Tessara stood there, hands on her hips. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "The women are sturdy," she corrected. She reached down a hand. Callan took it. She pulled him up with zero effort. But instead of letting go, she held his hand for a moment longer than necessary. The crystal bond on their wrists pulsed a warm, rhythmic beat that synced their pulses. "You anticipate the fall," Tessara said, her voice softer now. She stepped closer, invading his personal space. She placed her large hands on his waist. "Stop anticipating the crash. Feel the ground. The stone wants to hold you, not break you." Callan froze. Her hands were warm through his tunic. She was so tall that his face was level with her chest armor. He looked up. Her expression was focused, devoid of the anger from the night before. "Move with me," she instructed. She began to step slowly, a sliding, grounded movement. Callan mimicked her. "Left," she said. "Slide. Lock the knee. Right. Slide. Lock." They moved in a slow circle on the training deck. It was almost a dance, clumsy on his part, graceful on hers. "You are getting better," she murmured. "I am just trying not to get hit by a sandbag," Callan said. "Callan," she said. "At the outpost when you anchored me, you saw my memories. Didn't you?" Callan stumbled. Her hands tightened on his waist, keeping him upright. "Briefly," he admitted. "Flashes. A garden. A toy sword. And the day the news came," she added. "The day my mother died. Callan swallowed hard. Yes. I felt yours too, she said. But yours were walled off, like a fortress. You are protecting something, Callan. Or you are protecting me from it. Tessara. Just promise me one thing, she said, her golden eyes burning into his. Promise me that when the storm comes, and it is coming, you will be standing on my side of the line. I am bound to you, Callan said. I have no choice. Not the bond, she shook her head. You, the man, not the prisoner. Callan looked at this giant, terrifying, beautiful woman who was trying to teach him how to walk on her world. I am on your side, Callan said. And for the first time in days, it was the complete truth. Always. While the days were spent in the awkward intimacy of the palace, Callan spent his nights in the bowels of the mountain. The Emperor had given him access to the Hall of Records, a vast library of crystal shards that held the history of the Gate Network. Callan worked with a team of Karathi engineers, old men with skin like leather, who were initially skeptical of the small, soft human. That skepticism vanished when Callan dismantled a sensory array and rewired it in 4 minutes, using a dinner knife and a piece of wire. The frequency is wrong, Callan explained to the chief engineer, an ancient Karathi named Horgal. They were huddled over a holographic map of the sector. You are scanning for energy spikes. The hollow tide is negative energy. You need to scan for the silence. Silence cannot be scanned, Horgal grunted. It can if you invert the sensor dish, Callan said. Look for the holes in the background radiation. Look for the bite marks. He typed a command into the console. The map shifted. Instead of bright stars, it showed pockets of absolute darkness, and the darkness was moving. By the stone, Horgal whispered. It is a migration. Callan traced the path of the dark spots. They were not random. They were converging. They are eating the small outposts first, Callan muttered, building mass, gathering strength. He traced the trajectory. The line pointed straight at the center of the sector map. The Nexus, Callan realized. They are heading for the Nexus. If the hollow tide consumed the Nexus, the central hub that stabilized the entire gate network for 50 light-years, it would not just be a blackout. It would cause a cascade failure. Every active gate connected to the hub would overload instantly. Planets would be cracked. We have to tell the Emperor, Horgal said, reaching for the comms. Wait, Callan stopped him. What is this? He pointed to a small blip near the edge of the dark cloud. It was a distress signal, weak and garbled. That is the Oakhaven colony, Horgal said. A human settlement. Refugees from the Great War. It is right in the path. Callan felt a chill. Oakhaven. He knew that name. It was a retirement colony for veterans of the Coalition. We need to go there, Callan said. Now, before the tide hits. We cannot divert resources for a human slum, Horgal argued. We have to, Callan said grimly. Because if the tide hits that colony, it will absorb the residual energy of the old military tech they have stockpiled. And if it eats that, it will be too big to stop at the Nexus. The mission to Oakhaven was officially a reconnaissance sweep. Tessara commanded the strike team. Callan went as the technical advisor. The contrast between Korath and Oakhaven was heartbreaking. While the alien world was a place of gold and granite, Oakhaven was a collection of rusted, prefabricated shacks clinging to a rainy, mud-soaked moon. The landing party waded through the mud toward the main settlement. The air smelled of wet rust and despair. This is how your people live, Tessara asked, looking around at the leaking roofs and the gray faces of the humans watching them from the windows. The ones who survived the losing side, Callan said, his voice tight. Yes. They reached the town square. A group of armed humans, militia, holding rifles that belonged in a museum, blocked their path. That is close enough, giants, the leader shouted. He was a man with a cybernetic leg that sparked in the rain. We paid our tithe. We have nothing left. Tessara stepped forward, raising her hands. We are not here for tithes. We are here to warn you. The anomaly that destroyed Veiled Ridge is approaching. We do not believe Karathi lies, the man spat. Callan stepped out from behind Tessara. He pulled off his helmet. Stand down, Sergeant, Callan said. The lieutenant is right. Something bad is coming. The militia leader squinted through the rain. He took a step forward, his eyes widening. Ward, the man breathed. Callan Ward. Hello, Pike, Callan said. Lorne Pike dropped his rifle. It splashed in the mud. He looked at Callan as if he were seeing a ghost. I heard you were dead, Pike said, limping forward. They said the Voidwalker bought it at Station 9. Behind Callan, Tessara stiffened. Voidwalker, she repeated. Pike looked at the giant woman, then back at Callan. He let out a harsh, barking laugh. You did not tell her typical. Always the quiet one. Even when you were breaking reality. Pike, shut up, Callan said, stepping forward quickly. We need to evacuate the colony. The tide is 6 hours out. Evacuate with what? Pike gestured to the rusted ships in the yard. Those buckets will not break orbit. We are stuck here just like you left us in the belt. I did not leave you, Callan hissed. You authorized the Cinder Protocol, Pike shouted. The militiamen murmured, stepping back from Callan, as if he were radioactive. You gave the order, overload the gate, you said. It will shorten the war, you said. Well, it shortened the war by killing everyone. I was following orders from High Command, Callan yelled back. You were High Command, Pike screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Callan's chest. You were the Chief Architect General Ward, the man who broke the sky. The silence that followed was louder than the thunder rolling overhead. Callan felt the blood drain from his face. He slowly turned around. Tessara was standing there. The rain ran down her bronze armor like tears. Her face was unreadable, but her golden eyes were filled with a horror that cut deeper than any blade. General, she whispered. Callan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. You were not a mechanic, she said, her voice trembling. You were not a conscript. You were the architect. Tessara, please. Callan stepped toward her. Do not move, she roared. Her hand went to the hilt of her sword. The sound was so loud, so full of betrayal, that the human militia flinched. My mother, Tessara said, her voice shaking. She was commanding the blockade at the Cinder Belt. When the gate exploded, the report said the space twisted. It said the ships were turned inside out. She looked at Callan with pure revulsion. You killed her, she said. You murdered her. And then you let me save your life. You let me bind my soul to her killer. I did not know it was her ship, Callan pleaded, the tears finally mixing with the rain on his face. I did not know who was on the other side. We were desperate. We were losing. That is your defense, Tessara spat. Desperation. She turned away, unable to look at him. Get these people on our transport, she ordered her guards, her voice dead. Evacuate everyone and put him in the brig. Tessara. If you speak to me, she said, her back turned, I will forget the law. I will forget the bond. And I will cut you down where you stand. The flight back to Korath was silent. Callan sat in the holding cell, his head in his hands. He could feel Tessara through the bond. It was agony. Her grief and rage were a physical storm battering against his mind. He had expected this. He had known it would happen eventually. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. When they landed, he was not taken to the dungeon. He was taken to the war room. The atmosphere was chaotic. Generals were shouting. Mages were chanting. The holographic map in the center was bathed in red light. The Emperor stood at the head of the table. When Callan was marched in, Dareth looked at him. There was no warmth now, only cold calculation. My daughter has told me the news, Dareth said, about your resume. Callan straightened his back. He was done hiding. Then you know I can help. Help! Tessara stepped out from the shadows. She had not removed her armor. "You have done enough help, General." "The hollow tide is hitting the Nexus," Callan said, ignoring the jab. He pointed at the map. "Look, it absorbed the energy from Oakhaven. It is massive now. It will reach the central hub in 10 hours. If it touches the Nexus crystal, it will transmit a feedback pulse through the entire network. Every gate in the sector will detonate." "We know," Dareth said grimly. "We are mobilizing the fleet." "Fleets will not work," Callan shouted. "You saw it at Veiled Ridge. It eats energy weapons. You send a fleet, you are just sending it lunch." "Then what do we do?" Dareth slammed his fist on the table. "Do we sit and wait for the end?" "No," Callan said. "We starve it. We go to the Nexus. We manually shut down the core before the tide arrives. Then we lure it into the containment field and collapse the subspace pocket." "Manually," Horgal the engineer scoffed. "The radiation inside the Nexus core would melt a Karathi in minutes." "But not an anchor," Callan said quietly. Silence fell over the room. "I can do it," Callan said. "I can enter the core. I can sync with the crystal and hold the field stable while you collapse the pocket. I can endure the radiation long enough to finish the job." "And then?" Tessara asked. Her voice was quiet brittle. "And then I will probably die," Callan said, looking her in the eye. "And the bond breaks, and you are free." Tessara flinched, as if he had slapped her. Dareth looked between them. He saw the hatred, and he saw the pain. "It is a suicide mission," Dareth said. "It is a penance," Callan corrected. "He cannot do it alone," Kalen the mage interjected. "The Nexus is too big. One human mind, even an anchor, cannot hold the stability field against the tide. He will shatter in seconds." "I will hold on as long as I can," Callan said. "You need a catalyst," Kalen insisted. "You need the bond mate." All eyes turned to Tessara. "If she goes with him," Kalen explained, "her strength can reinforce his mind. Through the bond she can share the load of the radiation. She can keep him sane long enough to turn the key." "No," Callan said immediately. "Absolutely not. I am not taking her." "You do not have a choice," Tessara said. She stepped forward. Her face was set in stone. "The Emperor commands. The gate commands." "Tessara, this will kill you," Callan pleaded. "Do not do this because of duty." "I am not doing it for you," she said coldly. "I am doing it for the millions of people who will die if the Nexus falls. I am doing it to save the families that you would put at risk." She walked up to him. She was so close he could smell the rain and ozone on her armor. "We go to the Nexus," she said. "We fight. We win. But understand this, Callan Ward. We are not partners. We are weapons aimed at the same target. And if we survive," she leaned down, her voice a whisper of ice, "I want the rest of the truth, every secret, every dark thing you have hidden. And then I never want to see you again." "Deal," Callan whispered. The journey to the Nexus was a funeral procession. The flagship of the Karathi fleet, the Iron Will, led the formation. Inside, Callan and Tessara stood in the ready room suiting up. Callan wore a heavy-duty hazardous environment suit reinforced with lead and gold weave. Tessara was polishing her sword. The only sound was the hum of the engines. 30 minutes to insertion, the pilot announced over the comms. Callan checked his seals. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the sheer emotional exhaustion. "You should know," Callan said, staring at the wall. "Your mother's ship was the Vanguard, right?" Tessara stopped polishing. "Yes." "She was the only captain who stayed behind," Callan said softly. "When the gate started to spike, the other ships pulled back. She drove the Vanguard into the breach to shield the civilian transports. She bought them time to jump away." Tessara did not turn around. Her shoulders were shaking. "She was a hero, Tessara," Callan said. "I killed a hero, and I have to live with that every day." Tessara stood up. She did not look at him. She slid her sword into the scabbard on her back with a sharp, metallic click. "Let's go," she said. "Time to finish your war." They walked onto the bridge. The view screen showed the Nexus. It was magnificent. A massive diamond-shaped station floating in the void, surrounded by 6 spinning rings of light. It was the heart of the sector, a masterpiece of ancient engineering. And wrapping around it like a suffocating lover was the hollow tide. It was enormous now, a cloud of vantablack darkness, miles wide, blotting out the stars. It was coiling around the Nexus rings, crushing them. The station's shields were flickering sparks of dying light against the overwhelming dark. "It is already there," Dareth said from the command chair. "We are too late." "No," Callan said, stepping up to the tactical console. "It has not breached the core yet. The heartbeat is still there." He looked at Tessara. She nodded once. A warrior's nod. "Get us to the airlock," Callan ordered. "We are going in." As the dropship launched toward the dying station, Callan looked out the window at the black storm consuming the light. He touched the crystal bond on his wrist. It was time to pay the bill. The approach to the Nexus was not a flight. It was a descent into a graveyard of physics. The iron will shuddered violently as it dropped out of warp space, its inertial dampeners screaming against the gravitational shear. Through the reinforced viewports of the dropship, Callan Ward looked out at the heart of the sector. The Nexus was magnificent and terrifying. It was a structure of translucent crystal and white metal, shaped like a double helix spinning around a singularity. It was the size of a small moon, a beacon that had guided ships for 3,000 years. Now it was drowning. The hollow tide had wrapped itself around the station like a shroud of black oil. It was not a static cloud. It was moving, pulsing, sliding over the crystalline spires. Where the darkness touched the light, the station did not explode, it simply ceased to be. Spires vanished. Docking rings dissolved into gray dust. The stars behind the station were gone, swallowed by a horizon of absolute nothingness. "Energy readings are impossible," the pilot shouted over the roar of the atmospheric scrubbers. "The local reality index is dropping below 60%. I cannot lock the docking clamps. If we touch the hull, we might merge with it." "Do not dock," Callan ordered, his voice echoing in his helmet. "Hold position at 2,000 meters. We jump from here." "Jump!" Tessara turned to him. She was fully armored. Her helmet sealed her massive sword, magnetized to her back. "Into vacuum." "It is not vacuum anymore," Callan said, checking his wrist computer. "The tide has thickened the local space. It is like soup out there. We use the short-range teleporter. Aim for the central plaza." "The shields are fluctuating," the pilot warned. "I cannot guarantee materialization integrity." "I can," Callan said. He closed his eyes for a second, feeling the pulse of the dying station. It was faint and erratic arrhythmia, but he found it. 3-2-1. Mark. He hit the activation stud on his harness. The world dissolved into white noise. For a heartbeat, Callan felt the cold claws of the void, scraping against his mind, the same sensation as the day he saved Tessara. But this time, he was not pulling. He was falling. They slammed into the floor of the Nexus Central Plaza. Callan rolled his boots, skidding on the polished diamond floor. He came up in a crouch, his rifle raised. Beside him, Tessara landed with a heavy metallic thud that cracked the floor plates. "Atmosphere check," Tessara barked. "Thin," Callan replied, reading his HUD. "Life support is failing, but we can breathe." "Keep your helmet on." They stood up and looked around. The plaza was a cavernous space, vaulted ceilings reaching up 1,000 feet. It was usually bustling with diplomats and traders from 100 worlds. Now it was a tomb. The air was filled with floating debris, not just metal, but frozen droplets of water datapads and pieces of clothing. Time here was broken. A piece of glass falling from the ceiling hung, suspended in mid-air, rotating slowly. "Which way to the core?" Tessara asked. Her voice was steady, but her grip on her sword was tight. "Down," Callan said. 300 levels down. They began to run. The deeper they went, the more the reality of the Nexus unraveled. The corridors stretched and twisted. A hallway that should have been 50 feet long took 10 minutes to cross. Shadows on the walls moved independently of the light sources. And then, the whispering started. It began as a low buzz in Callan's comms static that sounded like distant rain. Then, it sharpened into voices. "Help us! Why did you close the door, Callan?" Callan stumbled, slamming his shoulder into the bulkhead. He gasped, clutching his helmet. "Callan," Tessara grabbed his arm. "What is it?" "Do not listen," Callan gritted out. "It is the tide. It uses residual psychic energy. It plays back the death echoes." "General Ward, the coordinates are set." The voice was clear. It was his own voice, 10 years younger. Callan ripped his arm away from Tessara and staggered forward. The corridor in front of him changed. The white walls of the Nexus bled away, replaced by the gray steel of a Coalition command bridge. He saw the tactical displays. He saw the red warning lights. He saw the Vanguard on the screen burning. "No," Callan whispered. "I am not there. I am here." "Callan," Tessara's voice was distant, muffled. He fell to his knees. The ghosts were surrounding him. They were not scary monsters. They were worse. They were ordinary people. A mechanic with a burnt face. A young ensign holding a picture of her family. A Karathi warrior with his armor fused to his skin. They stared at him. They did not scream. They just looked at him with hollow, accusing eyes. "You calculated the yield, General," the ghosts whispered. "You said it was acceptable losses." "It was the only way," Callan sobbed, curling into a ball. "We were going to lose the war. The hives were eating the outer colonies. I had to close the gate." "Callan." A metal gauntlet grabbed the front of his suit and hauled him up. Tessara slammed him against the wall. The impact shattered the hallucination. The command bridge vanished, replaced by the flickering lights of the Nexus corridor. Tessara's faceplate was inches from his. Through the glass, he saw her eyes were wide with fear and fury. "Wake up!" she roared. "You cannot break now. We are at the threshold." "I saw them!" Callan gasped, shaking uncontrollably. "I saw the crew of the Vanguard. I saw your mother." Tessara stiffened. She let go of him, stepping back. The hallway was silent, except for the groaning of the station's hull. "Tell me," she demanded. Her voice was not a request. It was an order from a princess to a subject. "Right now, before we take another step." Why did you do it?" Callan slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He looked up at her. He was done running. "The Cinder Belt was a trap," Callan said, his voice hollow. "The Coalition fleet was surrounded. The hive mind had cut off our retreat. We had 3 million civilians on the transports behind us. If the hive broke our line, they would have feasted on those worlds." He looked at his hands, the hands of a mechanic, the hands of a general. "I designed the Cinder Protocol as a theoretical deterrent," he continued. "Overload the gate capacitors. Create a localized singularity to block the enemy advance. It was supposed to be a wall." He looked at Tessara, tears streaming down his face behind the glass. "But I miscalculated the resonance of the Karathi crystal tech in your ships. When I triggered the pulse, it did not make a wall. It made a tear. It turned the sector inside out. Your mother saw the wave coming. She rammed the Vanguard into the breach to shield the civilian convoy. She died saving the people I was trying to save." "So you sacrificed us," Tessara whispered, "to save your own." "I sacrificed my soul," Callan said, "and it did not work. The war ended, but the tide was born. I ran. I hid. I tried to forget." Tessara stood there, a statue of judgment. She raised her hand to her comms unit. "Father," she said. "Did you hear?" The Emperor's voice crackled over the secure channel. It was heavy, tired, and devoid of surprise. "I heard, Tessara." "You knew," she said. It was not a question. "I knew from the moment his hand touched the Starbridge Argent," Dareth's voice admitted. The energy signature of an anchor is unique, and the signature of the man who broke the cinder belt is recorded in the Black Archives. I recognized him immediately. Callan looked up stunned. You knew, and you invited me to dinner. I bound you, Dareth corrected. Think Callan Ward. Why did I invoke the old law? Why did I force you into my house? If I had arrested you, the Karathi High Council would have demanded your public execution. The galaxy would have demanded blood. The realization hit Tessara like a physical blow. She staggered back. You protected him, she whispered. You used the bond to give him diplomatic immunity. You made him family so you could not kill him. He is the only one who understands the math of the break, Dareth said. Killing him would satisfy vengeance, but it would doom the future. I chose survival over justice, and I hoped that in saving you, Tessara, he might find the will to save us all. Tessara looked at Callan. The hatred in her eyes was warring with something else, confusion and a terrible, aching pity. You have been a prisoner of your own guilt for 10 years, she said softly. And my father made you a prisoner of his mercy. The station lurched violently. A massive boom echoed through the hull. The outer shield has failed, Dareth shouted. The tide is breaching the core. You have 5 minutes before the Nexus falls. Callan scrambled to his feet. He wiped his face. We have to go, he said. Judge me later. Execute me later. Right now, let me fix what I broke. Tessara stared at him for a long second. Then, she drew her sword. Move, General, she said. We have a world to save. The core of the Nexus was a chamber of blinding light. In the center of the spherical room, suspended by gravity beams, was the Heartstone, a diamond the size of a house spinning rapidly. It hummed with a pure white note that vibrated the teeth in Callan's skull. But the darkness was leaking in. Cracks had formed in the reality of the room. Black sludge was dripping from the air itself, pooling on the floor, reaching toward the Heartstone. The hollow tide was physically forcing its way into the engine room of the universe. The console! Callan yelled, pointing to a floating platform near the spinning crystal. He activated his jump jets, leaping across the gap. Tessara followed, landing heavily beside him. Callan's fingers flew across the interface. It is too late for a shutdown. The tide has already synchronized with the carrier wave. If we turn it off, the tide will just swallow the silence. Then we fight, Tessara said, turning to face the encroaching shadows. No, Callan said. He stopped typing. He looked at the crystal. We feed it. What? The tide wants energy, Callan said, unlatching his helmet. He threw it aside. It wants a soul. It wants an anchor. He began to strip off his gloves. Callan, what are you doing? Tessara grabbed his shoulder. I am going to manual, Callan said. I am going to synchronize with the entire network. Not just this gate. All of them. 5,000 gates. I am going to turn myself into the brightest lighthouse in the galaxy. You will burn out, Tessara said, her grip tightening. Your brain will boil. I will draw the tide in, Callan continued, his eyes, frantic but focused. I will pull every drop of it into this room into me. And then, I will fold the Nexus into a pocket dimension. I will lock the door from the inside. You mean you will die, Tessara said. I am already a ghost, Tessara, Callan smiled sadly. This is just making it official. He pulled away from her. He stepped up to the interface node, a raw pillar of energy. Tell your father I said thanks for the meal, Callan said. He slammed his bare hands into the beam. A scream tore from his throat. It was not a scream of pain. It was the sound of a human being expanded beyond the limits of biology. His back arched. His eyes glowed with blinding white light. The effect was instant. The leaking shadows stopped dripping. The hollow tide roared a sound that shook the station apart. It sensed the bait. It sensed the ultimate meal. The darkness rushed toward the platform, a tidal wave of night. Callan held his ground. His skin began to crack, glowing veins of energy spreading from his hands up his arms. He was channeling the power of 1,000 stars. "Come on!" he screamed at the darkness. "Take it! Take it all!" He was dying. He could feel his neurons firing for the last time. The darkness was closing in. He was alone. Then he felt a hand. It was large, warm, and rough. It grabbed his right hand, interlacing fingers with him. Callan tried to pull away, but the grip was iron. "No!" Callan gasped. "Let go, it will kill you." "Shut up, Callan." Tessara's voice was right in his ear. She stepped up beside him. She removed her gauntlet and plunged her bare hand into the energy beam alongside his. "The law states," Tessara shouted, over the roar of the energy storm, "that the anchor shares the load we are bound remember." "This is not a marriage," Callan yelled. "This is a funeral. Then we go together." She squeezed his hand. The bond activated. It was not the polite pulsing connection they had felt before. This was a floodgate opening. Callan felt her mind crash into his. He felt her childhood in the high mountains. He felt the weight of the armor she wore. He felt the crushing loneliness of being a symbol instead of a person. And he felt her forgiveness. It wasn't spoken. It was felt, a warm golden light that washed over his guilt. And she felt him. She saw the war. She saw the sleepless nights. She saw the moment he decided to overcharge the Cinder Gate, not out of malice, but out of a desperate desire to save the innocent. She saw that he was not a monster. He was just a man who broke because he tried to carry the world. "Double anchor engaged," the Nexus computer announced. The light in the room shifted. It was no longer just white. It was a swirling helix of blue and gold. "Pull," Tessara commanded. Together they pulled. They grabbed the fabric of space-time and wrenched it. The hollow tide shrieked as it was dragged forward. It tried to retreat, but the gravity of their combined souls was inescapable. The massive cloud of darkness was sucked into the chamber, spiraling down into the singularity between them. "Fold it!" Callan screamed. His body was shaking so hard, his bones threatened to snap. "Fold the space!" "I am holding you," Tessara yelled back. "Do it!" Callan visualized the math. He saw the equations of the universe. He grabbed the edges of the reality around the tide and folded. A flash of silence. Absolute, blinding, deafening silence. The darkness vanished. The room vanished. Callan felt himself falling. He was drifting in a white void. He was dead. He had to be dead. "It is over," he thought. "I can finally sleep. Not yet, mechanic." The voice was inside his head. It was strong. It was stubborn. He felt a tug on his hand. He looked down. He was still holding her hand. "Wake up!" Callan gasped his lungs, sucking in air, as if he had been underwater for a century. He was lying on a cold floor. His body felt like it had been run over by a freight train. Every inch of him hurt. "He is breathing," a voice said. Callan forced his eyes open. The light hurt. He blinked, tears streaming down his face. He was back in the Nexus core, but the room was different. The Heartstone was dark, dormant. The walls were scorched. The ceiling was missing, revealing the star-filled space above clean, empty space. No darkness. No tide. He tried to sit up and failed. "Easy," a deep voice rumbled. Dareth Kor knelt beside him. The Emperor looked older, tired, but his eyes were shining. "The tide," Callan rasped. His voice sounded like grinding glass. "Gone," Dareth said. "Sealed in a pocket dimension roughly the size of a marble. It is drifting harmlessly in the void between galaxies." Callan tried to move his arm. It felt heavy. He looked at his right hand. He froze. His arm was no longer just pale human skin. From his fingertips up to his shoulder, intricate glowing geometric patterns were etched into his flesh. They pulsed with a soft blue light. He looked to his left. Tessara was sitting against the console, her helmet off. She was covered in soot, her armor dented. She was looking at him. Her left arm, the one she had used to hold the beam, bore the same markings, but in gold. "You look terrible," Tessara said, a weak smile cracking her dusty face. "You look," Callan searched for the word. Like a supernova, she laughed and then winced, clutching her ribs. The bond, Callan said, looking at his glowing arm. It is permanent now, isn't it? The energy burned the connection into your DNA, Dareth explained. You are no longer fully human, Callan Ward. And she is no longer fully Karathi. You are something new. A bridge. Callan laid his head back on the floor. Great. Now I really can't get fired. 3 days later, the ceremony was held on the grand balcony of the Nexus, which had been hastily repaired. This time, it was not a trial. It was a coronation. Representatives from 50 worlds were there. The human coalition sent an admiral, who looked terrified of Callan. The Karathi legions stood in silent rows. Dareth stood at the podium. The War of the Shadow is over, the Emperor announced. His voice was amplified across the system. The hollow tide has been banished, and the debt of the past has been paid. He gestured to Callan, who stood by his side. Callan wore a formal Karathi uniform, now tailored to his size, but he had refused the medals. He just wanted his tools back. Callan Ward, Dareth said, turning to him. By the laws of the Empire, the completion of the great deed fulfills all debts. You have saved the daughter. You have saved the realm. The Emperor lowered his voice, so only Callan and Tessara could hear. The bond is biological now, yes, but the legal obligation is dissolved. You are a free man, Callan. If you wish to leave, I will provide you with a ship credits and a new identity. You can go back to the stars. You can disappear. Callan looked at the Emperor. He looked at the ship waiting on the pad, a sleek, fast courier vessel. It was his ticket out. He could go find a quiet rock. He could be anonymous again. No more wars. No more giants. No more guilt. He looked at Tessara. She was standing a few feet away, looking out at the stars. She was not looking at him. She was giving him the choice, refusing to pressure him. Her hands were clasped behind her back, but he could see her fingers twitching. She was terrified he would leave. Callan looked at his glowing arm. He felt the hum of the station beneath his feet. He felt the connection in his mind, the warm, silent presence of her thoughts hovering at the edge of his. He realized he had spent 10 years running from a ghost, but the ghost was gone. I have a condition, Callan said. Dareth raised an eyebrow. Name it. Callan turned to Tessara. He walked over to her. She turned to face him, her expression guarded. I am not a fan of the food, Callan said, and the gravity makes my knees hurt, and your family is incredibly intense. Tessara's shoulders slumped slightly. I understand. The ship is fueled. However, Callan continued, stepping closer, I find that I am terrible at working alone. I tend to break things. Tessara looked up, her eyes widening. I am staying, Callan said. Not because of the law. Not to redeem myself. I am done with redemption. I am staying because... He reached out and took her hand. The blue and gold lights on their arms flared, mingling together. Because you are heavy, Callan smiled. And I need something solid to hold on to. Tessara let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for a week. She stepped forward, and disregarding all protocol, wrapped her massive arms around him. She buried her face in his neck. If you stay, she whispered into his ear, you do not get to hide behind me anymore. We fight together. We bleed together. 2 people, 1 team. Deal, Callan said, hugging her back. She smelled like ozone and victory. But I am driving the ship. In your dreams, mechanic, she laughed. Later that evening, the celebrations were winding down. Callan stood alone on the edge of the balcony, looking at the restored gate ring. It was glowing with a steady, healthy violet light. Ships were passing through it. Traders, families, explorers. Life was moving again. He looked down at the railing. There, in the pristine crystal panel of the new balcony, was a small hairline fracture. A tiny imperfection where the stress of the construction had been too high. In the past, Callan would have walked away. He would have left it as a line he dared not cross. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his multi-tool. He knelt down. He activated the laser sealer. With a steady hand, he traced the line of the crack. He filled it with gold polymer, melting it until it bonded with the crystal. He did not hide the scar. He highlighted it. He made it stronger than the surrounding material. "Fixed," he whispered. He stood up. "Callan," Tessara's voice came from the doorway. "Are you coming? The diplomats are asking for the savior." Callan put his tool away. He looked at the gate one last time, then turned his back on the empty void. "I am coming," Callan said. He walked toward the light, toward the noise, and toward the giant woman waiting for him. The darkness was still out there, somewhere deep in the universe. But for the first time in 100 years, Callan Ward was not afraid of the dark. He had his own light now,